Running a collaborative design session or a usability test session is an important part of being a designer. It's not very useful to sit a user down at a table covered with prototypes and ask, "So what do you think?" People have a very hard time answering an abstract question like that, especially out of context. It's important to not just ask users what they think, but to also see what they do. It's just like the difference between looking at a car in a showroom or taking it for a test drive. In a nutshell, the purpose of the collaborative design or the usability test session is to maximize the amount of useful and reliable data from the session, while at the same time minimizing the stress on the users. As you might expect, these two goals can conflict with each other, so a good facilitator understands and knows how to make these kinds of trade-offs. It's important to remember that the users are doing you a favor, so the test should never be at their expense. I'm often asked whether it's better to have a facilitator or no facilitator when users are interacting with these products. I've seen usability tests conducted with no facilitator, where users have just been given a task to complete and it's filmed in a room. And this has some pros and cons. It does allow a user, completely unaided, to work through a problem in a way that is closer to how they may have to do it in the real world. However, this may put a considerable amount of stress on the participant, and it also misses out on the tester capturing and maximising information you can extract from the session. The facilitator is there to perform a number of roles, which I will cover with you shortly. But one of the main ones is to try and draw out from the user what the issues with the design are. The users may not be able to articulate these, so the role of the facilitator is to help the user interact with the product and draw out issues. As the facilitator, you are not there to trick the user into making a mistake or to help in an area just to be able to tick a box or to say that the design is right. You are not in a courtroom. This is why I never call usability testing or any testing involving users user testing, as it's not the user that's being tested, it's the design that is being tested. It is the role of the facilitator to make the process safe for the participant. Without the participants, we won't have any testing of our designs. It is important that the users have a good experience when they're going through this process. Central to the idea of usability testing is also the idea of informed consent. With the exception of paper cuts, there is really little physical harm that a user can come to during one of these sessions. However, any kind of usability testing or collaborative design session carries the risk of psychological or emotional harm in the form of embarrassment, frustration, stress, or just feeling stupid. It's your responsibility to avoid causing this kind of harm to people. Just as conscientious backpackers leave their campsite cleaner than they found it, the facilitator's goal is to have the users leave the session in as good or a better frame of mind than what they came to the session. Of course, users may be more tired, but they should also have reasons to feel good, such as hearing that their perspective is valued and how their feedback will make the product better. Ethics and consent are a whole other topic on their own, which we won't be covering today, but they are an important part of being a designer, and you should familiarise yourself with ethics related to usability testing and human-centred design. Facilitators have a number of responsibilities in managing a discussion and controlling the situation. Here are some of the obvious protocols that should be followed as a good facilitator. A smoothly run test can appear surprisingly simple, but a facilitator is a bit like a duck, serene on the surface, but paddling like mad underneath. There are many judgment calls that a facilitator makes in a usability session. How long should you let users struggle? When and how you should give them hints or tips? What do you do when there is not enough time to complete the task? Try to understand how all of these things or elements must come together. And it's probably simplest to think of a facilitator in terms of three important roles. The first one is the flight attendant, and this is probably the most important of the three roles. Just as the flight attendant's primary responsibility is the physical safety of passengers, the facilitator also makes sure that the testing experience is emotionally non-threatening for participants. The facilitator is responsible for briefing the participant, obtaining consent, monitoring users throughout the session for signs of stress, and providing assistance or reassurance when needed. The facilitator has the job of relaxing the user and making sure that they are comfortable during the session. Remember that they're doing you a favour by participating and working with you on the design of your product, whatever it might be. So treat them well. You should try to build a rapport with the participant and be polite and courteous. Hand up any coats, offer tea, make sure they know where the toilets are and that they can leave at any time. It's best to always greet the participants yourself if you're facilitating. It makes you seem more down to earth and less intimidating. In the end, it will make your job a lot easier if you take the time to perform these little niceties up front. The flight attendant will also assess the demeanour of the participant and adjust their approach based on what you can tell from looking at the participant. You should be monitoring the body language of the user for signs of stress, such as sighing, short answers when they're happy to give long answers previously, self-deprecation or self-blaming, or those kinds of statements are also important signs to look for. The facilitator also has the role of supporting the participant when things go wrong. In fact, this is one of the hard parts of being a participant, and they should be well supported. It's also the thing that will tell the development team the most about the product being developed. If everyone sails through the design without trouble, particularly if it's the first time, then it's more than likely that you have missed something, either in your scenario or that your understanding of the task that the user has to perform is not correct. Designs are rarely, if ever, right the first time. So when the user has trouble with the design, they're actually doing us a favour. This can be often very painful for both the user and the design team, as they feel stupid, and the design team will struggle to also understand where they got it wrong. So ensure you treat them with respect. Don't patronise them and support them, though, to safely get to the end of the journey. Explore why they're struggling by trying to understand what is behind the problem. So things like terminology, layout, location, or even the concept, and offer up alternatives until you've understood how to help them out of the problem. Then gently point them in the right direction by allowing them to either draw themselves out of the problem or move the test on. Don't ever think of the user as dumb or stupid. If a user is expected to do a task with an object that you believe they should be able to do, and they don't, then it's not their problem. It's actually yours and the development team, and it's for you to solve. It's reassuring to the user if you are listening to them and that you're following the logic of their problem. This is a good tactic, rather than just saying, don't worry about it, or you're doing well, when it's obvious that they aren't. If you are unable to understand the problem that they are having, you are best to redirect the session or take a break and see, out of hearing of the participant, if one of the observers understands what is going on. Usually what happens in this situation, however, is that the user has discovered something that you as the project people, the designers, could not see clearly as you are so close to the development. Things may inadvertently be left out of the interface as the designers and the developers forget that people who have never interacted with the product won't have that information. Always be open to the fact that you haven't got it right, and it might be right for you, but not right for them. So while the flight attendant's focus is purely on the user, the sportscaster attention is squarely fixed on the observers. The responsibility of the sportscaster is to make sure that the developers get as much useful information out of the situation as possible. The sportscaster introduces the concept of the Think Out Loud protocol. Through this, you encourage the user, who normally doesn't explain every thought and action out loud. You will need to encourage them to do just that. This will give the development team or the other designers information about the way the user thinks and their expectations, so that if changes need to be made, logical solutions can be found. As this isn't natural, you as the facilitator may have to do a fair bit of talking and encouraging to get the user to have them spill the beans on what it is that's going on inside their head. The facilitator shouldn't agree, disagree, or explain tasks to the users. They shouldn't encourage the user to go down a particular path or smile knowingly at the answer. It is important that the facilitator remains neutral towards the interface throughout the session. This is really hard for people, particularly if they've also been involved in the design of the interface. It is a good idea, unless you are a very experienced facilitator, not to facilitate collaborative design sessions for something that you've actually put together. Not only from an integrity point of view, but mainly from the ability to see clearly about what the participant is doing and what the results or modifications should be. The other important concept is the play-by-play commentary that a sportscaster provides. This is for the benefit of observers and may seem a bit weird that you're announcing out loud everything that you see, but you have an advantage of being able to see all of the action from where you are sitting. Often observers can't see the exact word, button, etc. that the user might be clicking on or referring to. Also, if you have observers in another room and you're taping the session, it will make it easier for the observers to know exactly what is going on. Avoid questions. I try to include in my briefing script a note to the participant, I won't answer all of their questions, and particularly if they're asking questions about the interface as we go through the session. It's good to tell them this up front, as you can say to them that you're not trying to trick them, that it's actually more useful for them to try to discover the answer themselves because they won't have you sitting there with them in the real world. So it's more important for you to understand how they solve the problem. If you can include this in your script, it's a gentle reminder then as you go through the process for the users that you can't answer their questions when they come up in the session. It always happens, even after they're briefed, they will still ask these sorts of questions, but you will be able to respond in a way that is less threatening. Does it really matter whether the user has made the right or the wrong choice according to you? Their choice, although not what was expected by the developers or designers, is the right choice for them in this situation. People who are unfamiliar with usability or collaborative design facilitation may mistakenly think that the scientist is the most important role of the facilitator. In fact, this role may often take a back seat to the other two roles. It is still important, but remember that prototyping is not an exact science. It is important to act professionally and apply your methods appropriately, but prototyping doesn't require exact measurements and the calculation of statistics. Most of the data you will gather is qualitative, not quantitative. Is objectivity important? Yes and no. The facilitator has all kinds of opportunities to introduce bias into the testing process. These things could be deliberate or unintentional, such as the use of a smile at the wrong time. However, given this, it is virtually impossible to remove the human element out of the testing process. Due to this, the role of the scientist is all about collecting the data and in understanding the participant's attitude, mood, etc., and how these have influenced the prototyping process. Can the facilitator take notes? It is possible, but even experienced facilitators may leave the note-taking to observers. My preference is to focus on the role of facilitating and leave the observation to others. That way, I'm maximising my ability to play the already 3 complicated roles to the best of my ability. A simple way of adding your own notes as a facilitator is to keep a stash of post-it notes close by. Make notes on these and then stick them to the back of the prototype screen when they're removed by your support people. Just make sure that your notes aren't visible to the participant if they describe something about them or their behaviour.